You're standing in a crowd at a concert, and the person next to you starts booing. You don't know why, you don't even know what you're booing, but your mouth opens and you join in anyway. Later, alone in your car, you can't explain what came over you. But the real answer is far stranger than peer pressure. For a few minutes back there, you weren't fully you, and that's not a metaphor. It's closer to a fact about how your brain works. Think about how strange this actually is. You have opinions. You have a name, a history, a sense of who you are. And yet put you in the right crowd, and some of that quietly dissolves. Not because you're weak, because of what a crowd does to the machinery running underneath your personality. In 1969, a psychologist named Philip Zimbardo proposed a concept that would come to define crowd psychology for decades. He called it deindividuation. His theory was simple and unsettling. When people become anonymous inside a group, when no one can pick them out individually, their sense of personal identity temporarily weakens. Not disappears, weakens. And when that happens, the usual internal brakes on behavior get quieter too. Zimbardo tested this in an experiment that still gets cited today. He had female participants deliver what they believed were electric shocks to another person, supposedly as part of a learning study. Some wore ordinary clothes and name tags. Others wore hoods and oversized lab coats that hid their identity and were addressed only by group number, never by name. The hooded, anonymous participants delivered shocks for twice as long as the identifiable ones. Nothing else changed, not the task, not the instructions, just whether their individual identity was visible or hidden. So what is actually happening inside you when you're anonymous inside a crowd? Part of the answer lives in a very old part of your evolutionary wiring. For most of human history, the group was survival. Being cast out of your tribe wasn't an inconvenience. It was frequently a death sentence. No group meant no protection from predators, no help gathering food, no one to notice if you got hurt. Your nervous system evolved inside that reality for an enormous stretch of time, and it built a powerful, largely unconscious drive to synchronize with whoever was around you. Copy the group's mood, match the group's energy. Don't stand out in a way that gets you left behind. That drive didn't disappear just because modern crowds are usually harmless. In 1996, a social psychologist named Kimberly Duffy studied something researchers now call emotional contagion, the tendency for one person's emotional state to spread through a group like a current. Duffy's research showed that both positive moods and negative moods spread this way, sometimes within seconds, often without anyone consciously noticing it was happening. You don't decide to feel a crowd's rising excitement or rising anger. Some part of you simply starts feeling it, the way a single voice can pull an entire room into song without anyone agreeing to join in. Now combine that with something your brain does almost constantly without your permission. Neuroscientists have long studied a class of brain cells called mirror neurons, cells that activate both when you perform an action and when you simply watch someone else perform it. Giacomo Rizzolatti's team first documented this activity in the 1990s, and while the exact scope of mirror neuron function in humans is still debated among researchers, the core pattern holds up. Watching someone else's emotional expression can activate some of the same neural pathways as experiencing that emotion yourself. Stand next to someone who is furious, genuinely furious, and part of your brain begins rehearsing that fury before you've made a single conscious decision about how you feel. Multiply that effect by 100 people standing shoulder to shoulder, all feeding the same signal back and forth, and you start to understand why a booing crowd can pull a boo out of someone who walked in 5 minutes earlier feeling completely neutral. This is where anonymity becomes the final ingredient. When you're identifiable, your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain most responsible for weighing consequences and checking behavior against your personal values, stays fully online. It's doing constant background work. Will this embarrass me? Does this match who I want to be? Will someone remember that I did this? But strip away visibility, surround someone with enough people that individual behavior becomes statistically invisible and that monitoring system quiets down, not because morality vanishes. Because the specific mechanism that ties behavior back to individual identity has less to grab onto. You can watch this pattern show up far outside stadiums and protests. Anonymous online spaces show remarkably similar effects. People post things behind a username that they would likely never say face-to-face, not necessarily because the internet made them cruel, but because the same de-individuation mechanism activates the moment identity becomes optional. Strip the name tag off, digital or physical, and the same ancient circuitry responds the same ancient way. But here's the twist that most people miss entirely. Deindividuation doesn't only produce cruelty. It's not a switch that only unlocks the worst version of you. Researchers studying crowd behavior at large charity events, religious gatherings, and mass sing-alongs have documented the same anonymity effect, producing extraordinary generosity, unity, and connection, not just aggression. Losing some of your individual self-monitoring can just as easily open the door to communal joy, collective compassion, and the specific, overwhelming feeling of unity that people describe after a stadium sings one song together as a single voice. The mechanism is neutral. What it amplifies depends entirely on what the crowd around you is already amplifying. That reframes the entire question. It's not really, does being in a crowd make you good or bad? It's, what is the crowd already doing, and how much of yourself are you quietly synchronizing with it? A crowd chanting encouragement pulls something different out of you than a crowd chanting insults, even though the underlying neurological mechanism, the fading of individual identity, the mirrored emotion, the anonymity, is functioning identically in both cases. Think back to the concert. The boo that left your mouth wasn't a hidden truth about your character finally slipping out. It was ancient tribal wiring, mirror neurons, and momentary anonymity, all activating in perfect synchrony, exactly the way they evolved to. You weren't revealing your true self. You were briefly running on older, more collective software, the kind built for a world where standing apart from the group could get you killed. This doesn't mean you're helpless inside a crowd. Awareness changes the equation more than people expect. The moment you consciously notice that you're synchronizing, that your emotional state is shifting to match everyone around you, some of your individual monitoring system switches back on. Not because the crowd stops pulling, because now you can feel the pull happening in real time instead of being fully inside it. So the next time you feel yourself swept into a group's energy, whether it's a stadium, a comment section, or a group chat suddenly piling onto the same joke, pause for 1 second and ask what's actually happening. You're not a different person hiding underneath your ordinary self. You're the same person, temporarily plugged into an older system, one built millions of years before anyone needed to worry about standing out in a crowd of strangers. You're standing in a crowd at a concert. And this time, before your mouth opens, you notice the boo rising before it's yours. You get to choose whether it becomes your voice or just passes through you. Because the real answer was never that crowds reveal who you are, it's that crowds reveal how ancient the wiring underneath you actually is.